Hello, everyone. Welcome back into another episode of the Taekcast. I feel so blessed to introduce a very old friend, Drew Dinkmeyer, to the show. I don't think, Drew, you have been on this show, I want to say since 2018, maybe
Wow.
even before then. You and Wiggins did an episode. It was like episode 60 or something like that, where you guys just talked about how hard it is to play DFS professionally and how much losing there is involved. One of the most downloaded episodes, actually. And then a lot of things have happened in between then in our lives. Drew, how are you doing on this very crisp Monday morning?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's pretty chilly up here in New York as well. But yeah, it's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to spend some time chatting and catching up. I like the emphasis on old friend, both in terms of my age and in terms of the years that we've spent batting it around in the fantasy streets. But happy to be here.
I think I might be older now than you were when we met. If I'm not, it's very close. I am older than Leone was when we met. And there's a
good question.
6-year delta between you guys.
How old are you now?
I am 32 years old.
Yeah, it's probably about right.
It's pretty close, which is a real Truman Show-esque experience for me growing up in the fantasy industry. So actually, a big reason, I mean, I just like to talk to you in general, but a thing I really wanted to get into with you today was this conversation that seems very prevalent on my timeline. Even football people who never talk about basketball are talking about this on my timeline and on podcasts now. This idea, no one likes the NBA. No one watches the NBA. The product is terrible. And it's like, I feel as if a lot of the people who complain about it don't watch it. And we can get into some of the reasons why they're not watching it. But I have League Pass, and it's basketball, one of the few sports I can watch without having to play fantasy or having a bet on the game, because I just like basketball. It's kind of like, that's kind of like my vacation sport, because I don't really have to do anything with it professionally. And the games are pretty good, man. Players are pretty good. There's a lot of like cool dunks. Guys are, a lot of complex stuff going on to get guys their 3-pointers. Jared Dubin wrote that great article in Last Night Basketball 2 weeks ago about, it really what it kind of reminds of political stuff, of just bad faith arguing, of being like, well, this is terrible, without having any idea of what's going on. But large question to you. Let's just start here. Do you enjoy basketball now as much as you did? I mean, you grew up a Bulls fan with Jordan, so probably not as much. But how do you feel about basketball right now?
I love it. I think the game's in a great place. I think there's just an immense amount of talent spread out throughout the league. So most games that you tune into have something pretty compelling that you can watch and tune into, whether it's a young player's development or whether it's a young team kind of ascending to try to take the crown. I think it's also different in the last few years with the new collective bargaining agreement, kind of balancing the powers a little bit and making it harder to build these super teams without consequences, is making it so that the regular season, feels interesting because we don't know who's necessarily going to be in the finals. I think for many years in the NBA, you had a very good feeling. It was like, okay, wake me up in June when the Warriors and the Cavaliers are playing. And I think for a certain, basketball fan, a person who checks in on the NBA just in the playoffs and stuff, I think that's interesting to them. But I think for people who really love the league and love being kind of deep in the league, I think not knowing what the ending is going to be at the end of the year is very, very interesting. So I love where the game's at currently.
Well, that is one of the key sticking points right there. I don't know. Do you read Ethan Sherwood Strauss? You might not. I'm obsessed.
I've read some of his stuff. I think he's very thoughtful on his content, and he's very good at kind of stoking flames. So some of the stuff I will come across because of like a clickbaity headline or different things like that. But I do not subscribe, but I have consumed some of his content. He's a very good writer.
Yeah. So I am obsessed with Ethan Sherwood Strauss. People who listen to every episode of this podcast know that I am just kind of something about the way he thinks about things is very interesting, but he has consistently made the argument super teams are actually good for the NBA, that The Golden State Warriors with Kevin Durant was actually good for the NBA. The LeBron Heat. I mean, LeBron Heat was basically the best thing that had happened to the NBA in the modern era. Obviously, the Jordan Bulls, the Bird Celtics. These were all by and large good things for the NBA. Do you agree with that?
I think if you're taking the perspective, and I think you would. I don't know that this argument would be made specifically for just the NBA. I think you'd be making that argument for all sports, right? You'd be
Correct.
making the argument that all dynasties or things that bring in kind of casual viewers into the room
Patriots were good for football. Yeah.
Right. So I think if you're making that argument across all sports, which is fine, I think the argument that you're making is essentially that, look, sports is a smaller part of society, and the amount of time that people can kind of dedicate to being invested in sports is lighter on the whole. So the thing that can bring them in, that is like simple for them to remember and be able to like touch base with and feel connected to, the better. That's the wider the net that it's going to be able to cast and going to be able to catch. And I think there's a reasonable argument for that. I don't think it's, for people who are diehard sports fans who like really, and when I say diehard sports fans, I want to separate diehard, like this, they love the sport. They're not a diehard fan of a team. I think that's very different. But for people who are diehard fans of the sport, I think it's unnecessary for that to, instill a lot of love and passion and energy towards watching and consuming the sport. But for the mass, yeah, certainly I think it makes sense that would cast a broader net. And certainly, like, if you look at the growth of the game, you can track back to the Jordan Bulls, the dream team. The most dominant kind of versions of basketball teams were the things that grew the game most globally. When you talk to when you see interviews from a lot of the foreign players who grew up kind of watching and consuming the NBA, this is the thing that kind of got them into the NBA and kind of changed their perspective of being able to be a professional basketball player. So I certainly think that argument is sound in the grand scheme of things. I think there's a question of whether ultimately that's ultimately, is that what's best for the league from a financial perspective, from an awareness perspective? Like, I think I don't know what metric we're measuring what's good for the league.
I mean, I think I measure it kind of in a cultural zeitgeist way. Like, in my experience with my friends who are not, they're just not degenerates like me. Like, sure, they play some daily fantasy, they play some best ball teams, they have their underdog account, but they like don't live and breathe it. They got things. Sports are not the first thing they think of when they wake up, and the last thing they go to bed. So like we were all big Thunder fans, right? So that first run with Durant, Harden, and Westbrook, like it would be an event. We would go watch a regular season game. Like, we'd go out to a bar to go watch a regular season game in college and things like that. And Durant leaving, for me, that was the big scales opening. Like, at that, I kind of fell out of love with basketball for a while after Durant, because that just, as a fan, like, that sucked.
Yeah.
That was brutal. But then the Warriors-Cavs finals, it's like back in those, they were so great. The Warriors-Cavs finals were awesome. The Kyrie shot, the block, it was incredible. But it has been 3 or 4 years probably since we have all gotten together to watch a basketball game. And I mean, obviously, like, we're adults, some people have kids, life. Like, there are, of course, that is just life in general. But I do I'll tell you this, the Boston Celtics winning, not one person in my life cared about that. Not one person in my life was happy for Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown or Joe Mazzulla. These the Celtics in particular are a very NPC basketball team, and I don't know if that's a marketing. I don't know why that is, but that is my professional social media observation on how people feel about the Celtics.
I think that potentially has to do with the history of that franchise, the loudness of the voices of that fan base. I think there's also like an oversaturation of Boston sports media, And so
For
I think
sure.
people feel just like disenchanted. Like nationally, I think people are a little bit disenchanted with like, God, we've heard so much about this little snow globe that you guys live in. Like, we're tired of hearing about it. So I think there's something specific
it's
to
all Bill
Boston.
Simmons' fault. It's all Simmons' fault.
I mean, there was it's yeah, Simmons is like the poster child for it, but I think there's like, you know, at one time when kind of sports media was growing the most, and when you had like Around the Horn and like ESPN had started making the sports writer like a featured part of their broadcast coverage, just generally in terms of shows throughout the day and different things. A disproportionate number of those personalities came from the Boston area. And so I think there was also a period of time where there was like an overinvestment in sports coverage from Boston that led to people feeling less excited when Boston had success. And then Boston had that run. I mean, I lived this in a very specific way because I went to college in New England in the early 2000s. And I had a lot of Red Sox fans that were my brethren as a Cubs fan, as we had not experienced the glory of winning a World Series together. And then once the Red Sox won a World Series, the Patriots started winning Super Bowls left and right. The Celtics won titles, the Bruins won titles. And next thing I know, these same people that I thought were my brethren are telling me how much it must suck to not be from Titletown. So it was like a very quick turn in a 15-year period from being, you know, the beaten down stepchild of the sports world to feeling dominant and on top of the sports world and wanting to take out that years of anger and frustration on everybody who you felt belittled you as a fan growing up.
I think culturally, it might actually be much simpler than all of this, which is that football is roughly played once a week. It's always played in prime time. You don't have to be constantly logged in. You don't have to be checking the standings every day. Everywhere you go, every radio station, your buddies know. It's actually, there's a very good anecdote example of this. There's a guy who goes to my gym who does not watch sports. He doesn't care at all, but he works in an office. He's an accountant, and he's like, yeah, I always check the scores on Monday just so I can have some water cooler talk. Like, I don't have to get in real deep, but I can be like, oh, did you watch the Lions last night or whatever? And it's like, you just really would not ever have to do. And maybe if you lived in a big, like maybe if you lived in, I don't know, Indianapolis and the Pacers were good or something, maybe it would be like that. But it's just, I think the NFL's dominance can really be almost reduced down to it happens once a week and they're all produced like events.
Yeah, I think that's a very big part of it. I think another big part of it, right, is the sort of like guys playing with helmets on that you don't see them personally and you don't feel as connected to them. I think there's a backlash between society and the amount of money that athletes make. And when you can put a face to the amount of money that athletes make compared to what you're making and soaring ticket prices and different things, there becomes a level of resentment against those players in that respect. And I think, especially in the NBA, you know, there's been a lot of fixation on the difference between the NFL and the NBA in terms of guaranteed contracts and different things like that. And so I think there's a little bit more just general resentment built by society towards the NBA players who have guaranteed contracts. There's a perception that they are not deserving of this money, so on and so forth. And so I think the NFL, because players are playing behind helmets, you only know, like most fans who are watching the game only know like a handful of players on each team. They don't really know kind of the whole team. And so I think there's a feeling of not only the event nature of things, but there's an anonymity around kind of the players that are making this money, that it's not like in your face as much. And I think people feel that they feel that that's somewhat more earned in some way, shape, or form. There's also the gladiator component of things that, like, culturally, like, we've grown accustomed to in terms of the physical feats of strength and different things like that. But yeah, I think ultimately the NBA, if they were trying to market themselves in a way that they could compete, you know, more directly with the NFL for people's primary attention in sports, they would need to play fewer games. But that makes less money for everybody, and the NBA players make very, very good money. So I don't think anybody's really particularly interested in that. But that's ultimately, you know, a big advantage that the NFL has in terms of it's set. You know exactly what the viewing schedule is. Thursday night, there's going to be one game. Sunday night, there's going to be one game. Monday night, there's going to be one game. Sunday at 1:00, there's going to be a bunch of games. Sunday at 4:00, there's going to be a couple other games. Like everybody knows exactly when. And during the whole week, you've got a buildup of which game are you going to watch. You ask somebody like, when's OKC play Boston? Nobody knows.
No chance. Yeah.
Nobody knows. People in there's also, changes in the broadcasting coverage as well going on with TNT
Bally's,
and
man.
Amazon and different things. So like there's all these different components that I think make it have made it more challenging for the casual viewer to know when they need to tune in for something big. And I think that was what this past week was so nice about the NBA was the first Wednesday after NFL regular season. There's no really big sports competing with it. The college football playoffs aren't going, and we've got Cavs versus Thunder on ESPN. I thought ESPN did a really good job marketing and covering that game. You had the cut-ins from SportsCenter with Scott Van Pelt after the game interviewing like Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland. And it just felt more kind of comprehensive in the coverage of that event in a way that happens with the other sports, specifically with football, with professional football, also with college football. And I think that was really nice to see. There needs to be more of that, but the NBA needs, it's hard to schedule in advance. They can't flex games as much. They did with that one, actually. It was supposed to be Knicks Raptors as the national game, but when the good teams have played each other, the basketball's been really good. Like the basketball on Christmas Day was quite good and quite entertaining. So it just needs to be a little bit more
transfixed with a 32-34-2 game where the Houston Texans don't generate a point on offense. And that's the thing. Basketball should actually be more entertaining for the modern American mind because it's quicker. There's always something happening. There's always something moving. There's not 40 seconds in between plays. There's not these, interminable stoppage. Well, at the end of games, there are these crazy stoppages in play that they're the NBA. I'm positive are going to work on that. There will be some new rule next year I promise you that will make the ends of games quicker, and your point highlights so much of it, which is that if people were just told the NBA is important and that they should focus on it, and if it was on their TV, that's what they would think,
So, one thing you mentioned when you opened this conversation was what you're seeing on your timeline, right? And I think one of the things that we have to put the context behind is the timeline on social media has started to lean culturally more right and more conservative.
Exactly. Yeah.
And culturally more right and more conservative has been sort of pitted against the NBA, since the Black Lives Matter movement, since kind of the COVID period where, it started to become like a cultural war. And part of it was kind of pitted up was the NBA. The NBA is woke. That was sort of the perception of it. And so, there's Clay Travis and all these right-wing people, woke is broke and all the stuff, right? So as the timeline has been taken over by kind of more conservative leaning viewpoints and the algorithm has become more conservative leaning viewpoints as well, I think you're just getting fed more of that content. So this is a lot of the conversations that I have are people who enjoy the NBA asking me, why is this happening? And I'm like, well, I think you're just getting fed more of these opinions than you were getting fed before. And I think the overall opinions of things are probably similar. These are just becoming the opinions that are winning out culturally in terms of what's getting fed to you.
No, I think that is maybe even the overarching thing going on. It's just culturally, we are in the 350 million people that live here, we are shifting to the right. So things that are on the left, it's downstream. I don't think conservative think tank people are like, we got to fucking kill the NBA. I don't think that's part of it, but just things that are on that side of the aisle are just naturally going to go that way, which is not to say that all things that are right-wing coded will succeed either, because baseball is pretty right-wing coded, and baseball is in Shohei Ohtani could basically walk down the street, I think, in some places.
Well, I thought your conversation with Pat Mayo on this was really insightful to me and something that I hadn't thought of before when he was talking about kind of the jingoistic nature of Americans in
100%.
That was incredible point that I had not considered before that made a lot of sense to me when he talked about that. And I think there's definitely an othering of the professional athletes that is negatively impacting the sentiment among Americans with regards to those sports.
Yeah, I mean, it is as simple as, well, I mean, do you know anyone who likes the French? Like Wemby has no chance. I speak French. I've read a lot of the great French writers and stuff. I don't even particularly like the French. Like Wemby has a long, and also there's this other thing with basketball and football. This is just occurring to me naturally, and I'm sure I probably stole this from a Simmons article on Page 2, like 13 years ago. Football players are kind of like us. They're like kind of rough. Like a quarterback is kind of roughly, like a quarterback could be your size, you know?
Yeah.
They could be 6'2". Pat Mahomes has a beer belly, you know. Josh Allen seems like a guy who'd be fun to eat buffalo wings with, you know.
Yep.
These NBA players are othered just by their size.
Yeah.
Just by their sheer, like Kevin Durant has never been able to walk into anywhere in his life and be inauspicious. LeBron James is 6'9", 250. These are human beings that are doing something that our brain can't even. It's the exact opposite of watching golf on a Sunday. The exact opposite of watching golf on a Sunday, where you're like, I know 6 guys who look like JJ Spawn, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. That and I think that's I saw a headline. I'm forgetting which pundit said, like, Victor Wembanyama will never connect as much with Steph Curry has with the fans of the game.
100%.
And that's 100% true, because Steph Curry, like, he connected with fans in a way that, like, meanwhile, Steph Curry is like giant compared to the normal population, right? Like, he just looks small relative to basketball players, but I think he's like 6'3". And so, like, giant compared to the average human being walking around in America. But the perception is like, if I could shoot, like, I can find a way to do that. But when you see like Wembanyama doing things, when you see LeBron James doing things, it's like, I could never do that. Like, it's like if Myles Garrett was the thing that we were focused on in marketing the NFL as the best player in the NFL, everybody would be like, okay, I could never be Myles Garrett. Like, there's no hope for that. But yeah, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, which, look, there's no hope for you to be Steph Curry. There's no hope for you to be Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, but there's a perception that maybe you could. They look a little bit more ordinary.
You could kind of pretend that you could go in your backyard and get good enough at shooting 3-pointers. You can pretend in your head, like, I'll go shoot hoops sometimes. And I'm like, well, Russell Westbrook is always the guy that, because he's always been my favorite. But even Russ is just like, well, I just try really hard. I mean, Russ is also an alien and like unbelievably athletic and stuff. But it's basically like a wolf or something.
Yeah.
Like, he just is like unbelievably, he just tries hard, you know?
Which also, like, getting back to like storylines, imagine in NFL if like the former MVP of the league went through like a 3 to 5 year period where they were like really struggling, They were a backup. I mean, we kind of had this with like Joe Flacco for a little bit last year.
Kurt Warner won Super Bowls 12 years apart, I think.
Yeah. So that story was awesome, right? And like covered wildly. Yeah. And Russ is having this resurgent year in Denver with Jokic, and it's just starting to pop up a little bit on timelines in terms of the impact that Russ is having. But he's playing with so much joy, and it's so much fun to see again this player that was transformational in terms of the way the game was played with so much effort and hustle, and you felt like all the time he was going at 110%. And he's still been playing that way a lot. It's just been less efficient. It hasn't been the right fits, different things. And now he's found kind of the right fit in a player that can maximize his strengths. And it's beautiful to watch, like, that joy back and that passion back in Russ's game. And I'm interested to see as we get closer to the playoffs if stuff like that is marketed a little bit more, because I think it's been like kind of an undertold story of this NBA season that's been really, really fun to watch as somebody who loves the NBA.
So I really love the NBA too, but I do think they've made a pretty large unforced error that no one was asking for, because the thing that is most popular about the NBA, and you and I might not like this, I actually love this shit, so I'm I'm not speaking for myself, but the transactional nature.
Right.
The transactional stuff made the NBA a 12-month a year league, the same way the NFL is. You got to pay attention to the NBA in May and June and July, or you're going to miss something. Free agency is big. The draft is huge. The trades are huge. And obviously all that stuff still exists, but these basically the minutia of the first apron, the second apron, the hard capping. If you stay in the second apron for 3 years, you start to forfeit your draft picks and all of these things. I get why they instituted it. And I get why the poor owners, I get why the Indiana Pacers owners are like, absolutely, let's ratify this immediately. And why Steve Ballmer is like, well, whatever, I'll just keep spending and I'll figure it out. I think that is a big unforced error. People, I don't know. They have to weigh the two things. Superstars leaving, Tyrese Halliburton in Indiana being like, well, I just don't want to be here anymore. Kevin Durant leaving, but I do wonder if they kind of learned the wrong lesson from the player empowerment era, which is we just got to have stuff to report on. We just got to have rumors. We got to have trades because people love that shit. They just really do. I don't know. It's hard both ways, I think.
The challenge, and this is getting back to kind of like, what Ethan Strauss would write about in terms of what is good for the NBA. The challenge is the things that are good for broad appeal are generally not as good for longevity in terms of growing fans, right? So like for broad appeal, things that are very interesting, transactions that keep things relevant in the news, that's really fun and entertaining, and be able to talk about the league kind of constantly. Super teams that are dynastic, that's like really fun for long appeal. But when those teams go away, then you have a lull that you have to kind of refill in terms of the void. And the game itself is the thing that is sustainable long term. Like the quality of the game is the thing that, if it was marketed and if it was kind of the front and center, would be the long sustainable path to building long-term fans who kind of grow with the game. But that will not win short term. And because it will not win short term, I think they're trying to like play almost like the Warriors front office, like a 2 timelines kind of game, which can be really challenging.
The 2 timelines, man.
And I think ultimately, if you put in the bucket of kind of short-term gratification and satisfaction, you would have super teams, transactions that get super teams. How do we like figure that out? That's the thing that like really encourages people. But then you look back and you look at like how it might have felt to be an Oklahoma City Thunder fan when Kevin Durant leaves, or how it felt when LeBron James left Cleveland, and what that can do to like long-term fans in terms of building them up. Now, in those 2 instances, those franchises rebounded incredibly well. So probably not the best examples because, LeBron came back to Cleveland. They end up winning a title. Okay.
Cleveland got so goddamn lucky that LeBron basically just has like a hero complex, because they should have been completely dead in the water. They should have been in the wilderness for a decade.
They should have been, but then they rebuilt after that, and they've rebuilt really well with this team, this version of this team now. And Oklahoma City has had, pristine management in terms of Sam Presti just nailing draft picks over and over and over again. And so you've had those 2 teams kind of rebuild themselves. I'm trying to think of a franchise that like lost a superstar player that like hasn't been able to rebuild.
The Magic.
In the same way. The Magic, they're starting to kind of pick it back up, but it has been a long time.
It's been 15 years, basically. Yeah.
So
I mean, we're even seeing the Spurs like really struggle. Like they have this great infrastructure, they have this great coach, they have all like.
Then they got Wembanyama.
They got Wemby, and they're still like they're actually, the Spurs are in this crazy spot where they're like, they probably should start just sending firsts out and trying to be the 6th seed this year.
They're like 2 years away from being like real big problems. They have a lot of first round picks coming to them too, from the DeJounte Murray trade, from DeMar DeRozan trade.
Yeah, I think maybe this is I just think other than Oklahoma City, the West is pretty gettable. Like they could if they made 2 trades.
Yeah, just wait till next year though. Wait till how gettable it'll be next year.
Yeah.
Like some of the teams in the West that are still kind of in the way are older teams, or like more restricted financially teams. Like Denver is a more restricted financially team. Phoenix and the Lakers are older teams. Memphis and Houston are the 2 kind of younger teams that are potentially kind of in the way. But like it's going to be really interesting to see how San Antonio builds everything. But kind of getting back to the original point in terms of if you were marketing the quality of the game and you were trying to build in fans for like the quality of the game. And this is another thing where a lot of people will be very critical of kind of TNT's coverage of the game and different things like that. And again, I think TNT's coverage has been net positive for the game in terms of people love Chuck and Kenny and Shaq and Ernie, and they love that studio show, and that brings them to watch the game. And that's a good thing in terms of bringing it to watch the game. But when that show goes away, when those people retire, are those people still going to be coming to watch the show? Or are they coming to watch the game? And I think because the NBA has leaned towards some of these shorter term benefits of marketing the game and trying to grow the game, I think they've lost a little bit in terms of the longer term buildup of the game. And that's where I thought in the last few years, we had been seeing this little bit of content renaissance in the NBA circles with JJ Redick's work at 321 and with Zach Lowe's work of highlighting and loving the game. And then we got hit hard. And then we got hit real hard in the last 6 months.
I would love to know the internal machinations that led to this happening. I don't think I've talked about this on this podcast yet, because Zach Lowe is sort of, what would be the right way to describe Zach Lowe's influence on basketball nerds on the internet? He really is sort of the,
I mean, he's the Steph Curry. He's the Steph Curry. He makes us all think. He makes us all think like, I could do that. I love the NBA this much. I could go through and like pull out clips and put them into an article and write like authentically great content about how much I love the NBA. He's the Steph Curry to NBA nerds. Like we all think we could be Zach Lowe, but he's like incredible at what he does, and we could probably not be Zach Lowe. But yeah, that's how I view him.
You know, I was gonna go even deeper than that. I was gonna go like he's like our Paul Atreides. He just is like he lights the way and we follow, and we're just like without the Low post, without Zach Lowe, like there would just the generation of people who were like, well, if you look at what Zach LaVine does in Second Spectrum, you'd know that he's much better off ball screens than on the move. You know, like the amount of people who think about basketball that way. And you could argue if that's good or bad or like whatever. And, you know, there's all kinds of stuff tied up in that. But that the number would be like cut in half, maybe probably even less, actually. And that feels like a really valuable audience, just like from like a sheer crass capitalism. Like, why would ESPN not want to have access to those guys for like consumer purposes, for like advertising to those people? I really don't. Maybe there's interpersonal stuff that went on. I have no idea, but it does just seem crazy to me.
Well, it seems like they've been making a lot of those choices over the years. Specifically, you could look at it from the NBA side, like Tim Legler did a lot of great content too, that was like trying to teach the game and help grow the game. He ended up doing some work with 321 as well with JJ's stuff that was great on weekly episodes. And they've chosen to elevate kind of the loudest voices in the room instead of maybe the most researched voices in the room. And they've chosen, because they believe that NBA is entertainment and news based, that they're going to create the entertainment with their personalities. And then they're going to have people who are connected to the game from a news breaking perspective, who are a little bit loose with journalism tactics that will kind of leak stuff, like Kendrick Perkins, who will just like say stuff occasionally that he feels like he knows. And that's very entertaining. Whereas like somebody who's raised with journalistic principles might be like, I shouldn't say that because I don't have that checked out with multiple sources. My sources didn't say that I could go public with this or different things. And so I think ESPN has just leaned into like, this is more entertaining and this is better for us. But I think we're, you know, as the game of basketball, I thought we were building momentum in terms of finding content that really celebrated the greatness of the game. And I think we lost a lot of that momentum with losing both JJ and losing Zach Lowe from a preeminent spot. I'm sure Zach Lowe will rebound and be in that spot again somewhere whenever a non-compete runs out, would be my guess. But it's a big loss. I mean, like now we're down to like Nekias Duncan and Steve Jones, who are doing great work in their podcast and kind of elevating the game and talking through it. But there's just not as much out there. And I thought JJ Redick was also doing this thing where he was elevating a bunch of people and bringing more awareness to the people that were creating the great content. And we don't have that kind of funnel right now in the same way. And so we're missing out a bit on that. He was also connecting with player interviews. Like his content was so good. As much as I root for JJ to be successful with whatever he endeavors to be successful at. I really miss the content that he was creating. I thought it was just exceptional in terms of connecting with the game.
I mean, shout out to Nate Duncan and Danny Leroux. I mean, that has been my my port in the storm. Like, and honestly, probably like I would have only listened to them, I don't know, once a week, twice a week when Zach's podcast was around, just because I have limited time. And now I'm like, well, not gonna be refreshing that feed. So we're just gonna get more Nate and Danny. And I'm probably more educated about more teams in the NBA than because Zach just had limited time and whatever. But it is just a bummer. Because the seasons coincide so perfectly, I just wish the NBA was more popular, basically, is how I feel about it. I just wish more people were like, man, I like basketball. I like seeing dunks. And like, it is disheartening to me. And I think this might be specifically our timelines because it interacts with DFS in a really annoying way. The resting and the, oh my God, Jalen Wilson started for the Nets and he was 7% owned. But he went for 47 because he played 39 minutes. Like, I think it's specifically our really small corner of the internet that gets annoyed by the resting and stuff. And that probably doesn't matter to a regular fan that much, like who's resting for the Brooklyn Nets.
I think it matters in the sense that, and I saw like Steph rested against Indiana the other night, and a bunch of kids had come to the game to hope to see Steph Curry. Now he like ended up taking a bunch of those kids and doing like a little session with them, like a meet and greet session with them, which Steph is awesome and really cognizant of that. But I think that is something that the game is losing, and it also hurts the perception, right? The perception of all of this is that these guys are soft, that they are getting injured more, that when the reality is these guys are the physical requirements of playing an NBA game have doubled or tripled in the last 10 to 20 years because of the amount of court coverage that you're having to do. Like if you look at kind of the data on how many miles run during a game and different things, it's like doubled or tripled so it would make sense that if you're doubling or tripling the physical output required, that you might have more strains and more injuries and different things like that. And the NBA hasn't scaled down games to try to coincide with that. So I think it hurts the perception. It hurts fans who don't feel like they know if they can buy tickets. They don't know if like, oh, am I getting what I paid for? Or am I getting something that's much less than what I paid for? And that feels like a terrible experience for a fan. So I think a lot of the things around rest is something that the league like really does need to figure out, because I think it's a narrative that has been created that is eating away at the value of the product. But it's something that the ultimate solution is fewer games and less money. And that just has not been the choice. I mean, you look at the NFL. NFL is continuing to try to work towards more and more. And I think these leagues just like
so the NFL is this big advantage because people don't care if the games are bad. The ratings are good for like the worst, shittiest slop. Like those Christmas days.
As long as the quarterbacks are playing, like the quarterbacks are playing, people like don't notice that 3 linemen are down and the game got a lot worse because 3 linemen are down. But as long as the stars are playing, and that's where the NBA, it's not the same kind of maintenance mode. You can't like the NFL has tried to control for quarterback safety, right? Now, this new version of quarterback that's running more is going to be kind of challenging to that, but they've tried to control for player safety, specifically at the quarterback level. The NBA can't really do that. These guys are playing both sides of the ball. You can't control it and manage it in the same way. So it's just not apples to apples.
Yeah, no, it really isn't. This is just while we're on the NFL real quick. What do you want the Bears to do? What's your
God.
We have not talked about Caleb Williams yet. Where are you at with Caleb, with the head coaching search, with Ben Johnson's going to get hired by the Raiders? What do you want? Because I think this all played out in a very predictable way, very Bearsy. You don't fire Eberflus when it was obvious he had to go. Then every other coach gets fired. It's a mess. What do you want to have happen? Or do you just have no hope?
I have no hope is really what it is. I came in with hope that Caleb was so talented and so unique and so good that he could overcome this dismal franchise. And then after seeing the way that this year played out, I'm a broken man when it comes to the Bears. I have a former coworker from a past life that is a Packers fan that texts me all the time whenever there's a Packers-Bears game. And after this last one, he said, "Congrats on winning your Super Bowl." And I just said, they can't hurt me anymore. I can't, whatever happens. Whatever happens, I feel like is going to be wrong. Like, you hire Ben Johnson and there's going to not be the culture that they need. They hire the culture guy. They're not going to have an offensive mind that they need. They get the offensive mind. He's going to get poached to be a head coach somewhere else in 2 years. I'm just like, I have so much pessimism when it comes to the Bears, sadly.
Yeah. It stinks, man. It really, I wouldn't wish it on anyone to have to do what Bears fans have had to do in the last.
I was in like the group chat last night with like Kretsch and Crane and Leone, and Kretsch is like, "Man, Jaden Daniels is so good." And I was like, yeah, just imagine how bad he would have been if he was a Bear.
Imagine how many sacks. We actually don't even have to imagine, because Jaden Daniels was super ass for a terrible team in college. 10 touchdowns, 10 interceptions his junior year in college for like a really terrible team.
Yeah, but he's a completely different player now. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Like that Washington offensive line was not supposed to be good this year, and we know that sacks are mostly a quarterback stat. So like, he's awesome now. But like, I feel like if he was a Bear, it wouldn't have happened. That's how I feel now. I feel cursed.
Yeah. I think you're unfortunately correct about that. All right, I asked Leone this question, and I was interested in his take. People think you guys are the same person, but you're actually not. How do you deal with ETR being so important in gambling and in daily fantasy? Because I talk about this a lot on my shows of just like, without ETR, a lot of people would have no fucking clue. Like, people log in to these daily games on Underdog, and it's like, you can literally, in any sport, NFL, NBA, whatever, and you could just demarcate, well, this is before ETR, this is after ETR, or in best ball, or like Leone told the story about, the prop sites, like having to subscribe to you guys. Just like, what is that like for you? Just like, as just a human being, just Drew Dinkmeyer, who is a cog in this machine.
Stressful is the first word that kind of comes to mind. I would say that generally my personality is that of like people pleaser, just naturally. And so I want to put out a product that people really love and really interact with. I want to put out a product that I have a lot of pride in and that people view as, the measuring stick. And there's a lot of pride that I've gotten from our product, but it's also come with a lot of responsibility in terms of feeling like, God, if we miss something, people are wagering on it in a way that it could have a meaningful impact on them. And so, we not only, this is every day that every day there's NBA games, every day there's new situations to try to project. Every day I'm spending, all of my time trying to figure out how we can kind of best project things. I'm looking at the market. I know our projections are going live at 5:00 Eastern time every day. I know when our projections go live, people are immediately betting off of them. I'm trying to educate people in our Discord of what situations are fragile.
I was going to say that people are definitely immediately firing, and it's like, well, I just guessed that Cole Anthony wasn't playing tonight.
It's just like, or like somebody, like sometimes they'll be betting on stuff that I didn't even see in the market, and people are like, oh, like, I lost so much money today on Adem Bona assist lines. And I was like, where were those? Like, the third string center for Philadelphia. And like, he's played like 70 NBA minutes. Like, I probably don't have a great baseline for him. Like, I didn't even see these lines come up. So like the next day, I'm deep in Adem Bona, like college and international stats and different things like that, trying to figure out a better baseline for the guy. It's just like, it's stressful. It's super challenging. And it's something that, honestly, like, I spend a lot of time in therapy trying to work through how I can like separate kind of my work life from my identity as a whole and the people pleasing aspect of things. But it's hard. And it is hard to make money gambling. It is just it's a really challenging way. Like, I live in New York. A lot of my friends are very, very successful professionals in a variety of different industries. And every time I talk to them, I think, God, I chose like the hardest way to try to make
You could have just put it all in Bitcoin in 2016.
Yeah, that would have been the easiest way. That would have been the easiest way. But I was not a believer, so I have to grind it out here. And yeah, it's just like
the one thing I got right in our time together that you could have tailed me on to generational wealth. You tailed me on Bishop Sankey, but not on Bitcoin. And there is a lesson in that. There is certainly a lesson in that.
I just need to keep firing. I would have eventually found it. Asymmetric upside. But yeah, it's super stressful is the way that I put it succinctly.
Yeah, I find it, it's so funny because I think like Levitan and Silva probably have a much different approach to it, where they're like, our jobs are to present the information and people could do with it whatever they want. And that's totally up to them. That's their own personal choice. But I just have known you for so long that I know that you're like, shit, man, I got Emmanuel Quickly's assist rate wrong. And I just like, I can't believe that was just so stupid of me to get Emmanuel Quickly's assist rate wrong,
Yeah. No, that is my personality. And there's also like, I guess the way that I'd put it is because there's so much information flowing during the course of the day. There's a lot of NBA games. There's a lot of situations that are sort of unknown that we're waiting for more information to be able to project it effectively. I feel like the cartoon character on a boat that has just been shot by a machine gun, and there are just holes popping up, and I'm trying to plug a hole, and then another one pops up, and I'm running to that hole, and I'm trying to plug that. And that's how I feel 7 days a week during the NBA season for kind of all of my time. And then once our projections go out, we have technology to help notify us when new lines are posted and different things, so we can compare our projections to them. And then it's like a race for me to like check and double check and compare our projections to see if they like make sense relative to what the market thinks, because I know people are betting them like instantly. And so it's a very challenging job. I get compensated well for it, but it's like it's super, super stressful.
You got Gallagher with you now,
Yeah.
He's and no one loves to work like Michael Gallagher. I mean, you could send that guy down the rabbit hole for the Raptors, third string center, and he would be happy to watch EuroLeague highlights of whatever third string guy.
Yeah. I'm very lucky to have worked with, and like Mike was somebody that like ETR had the idea of pairing us together. Like I didn't know Mike personally when we started at ETR, and very lucky that Andrew and Taylor and Adam kind of had that idea lined out, because working with people who will work like you work when you're a person who has like extreme work ethic is super, super valuable. Like it's so hard when during these times, like, our busiest part of the season is during the holidays, right? It's during like Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah for those who celebrate. So, like, it's during this window, and I am grinding so hard during this window and just to have people who are like, yeah, that's what this is. That's what our job is. Like, is such a blessing for me, because it's hard for me to reason. Like, I know I'm unreasonable with my work ethic. I understand that. But like having other people who are unreasonable with their work ethic is so valuable to me, because I don't have to have the difficult conversation of like, okay, like I know it's your son's 5th birthday, but like we kind of need to figure out this Emmanuel Quickly assist rate. So yeah, it's a pleasure working with Mike Gallagher.
It is. I guess we kind of talked longer about basketball than I thought we would. This is kind of the last thing that I wanted to cover with you, because you've been through all of this. You were there, UIGEA, New York makes DFS illegal, Ethan Gate, all that stuff. Obviously, these sites care way less about daily fantasy and fantasy in general. Just there's less attention, there's less care. We've got the NFL Red Zone does still give us the showdown lineup, which I think is so quaint, but like it's same game parlays, it's touchdowns, it's props, right? This is the dominant thing.
Yeah.
What do you think is kind of the future of fantasy sports? Season long, best ball, daily fan, like what is the avenue? FanDuel did very much surprise me this year. Not enough that they changed their system so that I could ever log in without having to change my password. But they made changes to their daily fantasy product. They made prize pools bigger. So maybe my read, which has been that eventually the sites are going to just like truly let this be like, we're all going to be the Japanese soldiers still fighting 29 years DraftKings. Like, oh my God, we still operate this. This part of our website still functions. People are still there. Like maybe that read is wrong, but just kind of what is your vision?
I think that anything season long related, anything fantasy football related, I think is probably going to continue on the path that it's been on. I think best ball in new game types and different things like that will only kind of increase people's interaction with fantasy and with the games. I think the trajectory of all those things is up in general. I think people love fantasy football. It's a part of our culture. It's a big reason that the NFL is so successful.
For sure.
And I think different formats of fantasy football are just things that people will get exposed to and be interested in over time. I think other sports that have not had as much of a grip on them by fantasy sports, but have the same sort of schedule as the NFL, like golf. I think trajectory is really strong.
Golf could be the second biggest sport in America if they figure this live shit out. They got it. It'll never happen if they don't figure this out, but the avenue is right there for them.
Yeah. So things that people can have like a quick touch point with, feel like they're connected, feel like they know what's going on. I think, it'll have to be fantasy leagues that have a smaller subset of players that you're choosing from. So it doesn't have to be super complex. So people have to know, who the next, Rio Hisatune is or whatever. I think that, I think that could be very successful. The daily sports, I think DFS is going to be a slow decline, most likely over time, until eventually our generation kind of ages out. And because the new generation, I don't think is getting, the people who are now interacting with wagering on sports in their 20s, I think are doing so less via daily fantasy and more via sports betting, parlays, different things like that. Maybe, prize picks, underdog in terms of that. You could technically label fantasy sports, but the pick'em type games and stuff. And so I just don't think if those sites end up being a feeder to like best ball and stuff, that's viable. But I don't think we're getting the same feeder system into DFS, and DFS grew at a very unique time when there was no other competition to this stuff. And so I think our generation that loves these DFS games will continue to find them very interesting and continue to play them. But I think that'll be kind of a slow decline for the daily, for NBA, for MLB, for hockey, those types of daily sports.
DFS is kind of like a freak accident of history, actually. Yeah. It was like the computer technology became available, but gambling wasn't legal, but fantasy sports were legal. People love to gamble, right? Poker.
Yep.
If poker was still legal online, I think daily fantasy sports would have been really small. I've never thought of it this way, but it is kind of just, and if you're someone who's into history, you just see that kind of everything that happens is actually a freak of history. Like everything, the temperature had to be just right for like kind of literally anything in human history to happen.
Yeah. Guns, germs, and steel.
Yeah. But that is kind of the way DFS went, that if gambling was never legal in the first place, there would have been really no need for it. I mean, maybe, I guess someone would have come up with an idea that was similar, but probably would have never been, $1 million to first place type. It would have been smaller, more niche, I think, because it is a pretty complex game. Like imagine trying to onboard someone to like the solver right now, someone who's only ever played season-long fantasy and being like, okay, this is what you're doing in the solver, this is how it works, this is why it works.
Oh, I have close friends, like the best man at my wedding, who like knows what I do well. And I was talking to him this past weekend, catching up, and I was like reacting to one of the late games and stuff that I needed to happen or whatever. And he's like, how do you even manage this? He's like, how many lineups do you have out right now? And I was like, hundreds. And he was like, how do you make hundreds of lineups? And I was like, well, I use them. I make lineups in an optimizer. Then I simulate the contest that I'm going to play against by creating fake lineups that my opponents might use. And then I test the lineups that I create against those lineups to figure out which lineups I want to play. And he's just like, man, when I play DFS, I just like go in and I just pick a few players and I log out. He's like, you telling me that this is what you do just makes me never want to play DFS.
He's the phone shitter, bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was probably a good year, by the way, in daily fantasy for the Phone Shitter Bro. Phone Shitter Bro probably cleaned up. It's like, oh, dude, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry. All right,
I don't know, man. They're probably playing a lot of Patrick Mahomes. I don't know.
Yes. Dude, Patrick Mahomes is $6,000.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. One of the things I actually am kind of hoping is that DraftKings kind of gives up on their pick six game that no one likes and people don't really like to play it. And they're like, they either use best ball or DFS as their customer acquisition tool because they already have this huge infrastructure built. They already have the customer support for it. They already have all the code. Like, it's not difficult for them to do this, for them to really promote the DFS side as, because eventually you're going to reach the upper limit of people who like do not have sports betting accounts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, with their business model of just like limiting anybody who's got a pulse and letting, and kind of predatorily marketing towards anybody who doesn't. Yeah,
I guess new people turn 18 every day, Drew.
It's true, but
day.
I mean, this is a bigger conversation. But the current approach by the sports books is not sustainable long term for either them or society. So like, it's going to run into a head. Like at some point, like you need to actually be running a legitimate sports book where you're trying to use information from sharp people to recreate a line that can be more efficient and then get more money closer to lock time. Like that's how you need to run a sports book long term to be sustainable. This stuff where you're like trying to run a sports book that just basically identifies who's sharp and who's not, and then tries to narrow your pool down to who's not, and then market really heavily to them. That will be short-term winning from a profit standpoint, but that's long-term unsustainable because you are killing your own customer base, and society at some point is going to step in and be like, yo, you are creating too many people who have too many problems. We need to regulate you hard. And like that, so I just think the long-term business model that some of these companies are taking just doesn't, I mean, we don't live in a long-term society anymore, so people don't think about these. This will be some future CEO's problem, but I don't think it's a winning long-term bet for the way that they're doing things.
I mean, can't they just they can mostly just copy trade Pinnacle though, or like substitute your sharp book of choice?
Yes, they can. Well, that's what they do. That's what a lot of these places
do
now.
They do right now.
Because that saves resources. But but if you can't do that, if you're vulnerable to timing there, and because you're vulnerable to timing, they have harsher limits, and because you have harsher limits, it's harder to get liquidity up. And so I'm obviously new to all this because I've started to get into sports betting in the last few years, but this model, just from everything that I've read, does not seem sustainable long term. It seems like short-term land grab stuff to try to become the dominant player, and then once you're the dominant player in a culture that values monopolies, you're set up to, you're too big to fail. And so that's what they're going for. But I think it's a long-term losing strategy, because I think it's going to thin out the amount of customers that you could potentially have with this approach long-term.
I mean, that's kind of the way it works overseas, is Pinnacle will take your action. They'll do, $50,000 game day of game, Champions League and things like that. But they also have, they're also overseas the opposite, where it's you can only do, they call them bet builders over there. It's same game parlays, basically, but gambling is part of the culture there.
Yep.
I'm going to lose a tenner on the Bournemouth game. And that's just what they do.
Yeah. It's much more of a responsible built-in part of the culture. It's been kind of a longer build. We try to, microwave everything, accelerate everything. So it's harder for us to understand what the potential consequences down the road are going to be.
I do not have an Atreides prescience vision of the future, but I do hope that daily fantasy sports that they still care about it. I really just hope that the high-end employees there, I hope that Kalish and Robbins and these guys, I hope they just are well, we like that daily fantasy exists. It was how we started. We don't want it to go anywhere, really.
Yeah, I hope so. I think football will always don't have any concerns about football, and I think golf is growing.
No.
I think golf, but I think the touch points need to be easier for the customer, and the daily sports are becoming more challenging to be that for the customer because the level of complexity of these games is getting more and more challenging. And that's the nature of kind of efficient markets. So you need to create new games and new innovation. That's where I think Underdog's been really good at that stuff. Creating new games and innovation allows people to like all try to learn the rules together and figure it out together. And so I think that we need more in that space.
I think you're right. All right, Drew, let's get out of here. Thank you very much.
I want to talk book. You want to
talk about this book? All right.
Give me 5 minutes to talk books because I actually read a book this year.
You actually read a book. Yeah. I always just like to ask people what the favorite book that they read in the most recent year was. And Drew has an answer to this. So Drew, what was the favorite book that you read in 2024?
So I don't read a ton. My wife reads all the time. And I had one of her friends recommended this book to me by Mitch Albom, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. And I am not a religious person either. And I read this book and it was like life changing, perspective altering in some of the like, I mean, I was just bawling during reading this book in terms of like, it's just an incredible journey through one person's vision of what dying might look like. And in terms of like, navigating to an afterlife. And there's so many parts of the book that stand out to me, but there's one part in particular that I think of every day. And I think for your audience, for our audience that is aging and a lot of stuff that you talk about in terms of physical fitness and maintenance and all these different things. There's a part in the book where the lead character has passed on and is now taking a version of himself that is a childlike version of himself. And the thing that he feels is he feels like, oh, I have legs that I can run. Like I feel the urge to run. Like I'm a child and I feel the urge to run and I just want to run and I'm going to run as fast as I can and as far as I can. And as I get older, as I'm into my 40s and working towards my mid 40s, every physical activity I do is harder and more difficult. And I think about when I'm like stretching and I'm feeling like the edges of flexibility that I no longer have when I play tennis and I limp around the next day because I'm feeling like the effects of that. I think about how I still have the ability to do this and the gratitude that I have for still being able to do this because there's going to be a time in my life when I'm not going to be able to do this. And that perspective shift was like so incredibly valuable and this book brought me to a place of gratitude and presence immediately. And I read this on my honeymoon. Actually, I was just like on my honeymoon in a pool, just like crying while reading this book. So I thought it was such an incredible, like transformational book for me in terms of trying to be present, trying to be grateful for the things that I have at this point in my life, because the next day is never guaranteed to you. And what the end of life looks like is always a little bit messy. So appreciating what you have now. And so it was just an incredible read. And you said you've read it before, right?
Yeah, I read this. My maternal grandmother loves these Mitch Albom books.
Yeah.
So I will always humor my grandmothers if they know that I love to read, so they always give me books for Christmas and things like that. I mean it is a very lighthearted, probably is not the word. It's very sentimental.
Yeah.
You are meant to be in touch with the most saccharine emotion that your brain can possibly access. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I did not. I was not crying in the pool.
No.
When I read it. No, I tend to be more of like a dispassionate reader, which is the book. The books that get me in those emotions are I never say is Titch Not Han.
Yeah.
And these, like if I read, like if I or I'm reading Aristotle's Metaphysics right now, which is like these like ain't these creaky old philosophy books actually get me more like that, which just says more about me than it does about you or anyone else. But
well, it does. That will, like, those types of books will sort of feel like time is frozen in a way where it's like, God, the human experience is
universal.
so similar, is so similar across generations and eras and different things like that. The struggle that we all deal with internally is the same for everybody. It's just different versions, right? It's your specific version of the life that you've lived, but the same like challenges, in terms of like conquering the mind, are there kind of universally.
Well, it's so funny because I'm thinking of like the last book that really shook me and made me change my behavior in my life. And it is so funny because really could not be more of an opposite situation for you and I. But I read David Goggins's first book this last year, which is like not an intellectual book, I don't even really think you should take it that seriously. And in fact, like 2/3 of my personality would openly mock someone for reading this and taking something from it, but it did. I just read it and I was like, you are just lazy, man. You're just lazy. There's just so much you could be doing in your life. Like, you're just late. Just get the fuck up and just just go outside. Go have dinner with your wife. Like, just don't be sitting on your phone. Like, just go do something. And anything that can make you feel that way, because obviously it's just so easy to be lazy. But which is like, I mean, basically the same experience you had reading that book, which is just like, my lived experience is so valuable and I should be thankful for all of it. I should be thankful for my legs. I should be thankful for my wife. I should be thankful for all these things that I just accept. I just wake up and I drink my coffee and I just like, oh, this is my life and I'm just living my life. I do my loop. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And anything that gets you to realize your own existence and be like, I don't want to be an NPC today. I want to just live. I actually want to live my own experience. I don't want to just like fly through it. I am all for. So to do whatever you need to do to not be an NPC, I think is good advice.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as you get Emmanuel Quickly's assist rate, right?
If you don't get, then you better hope that the playable characters are not too mean to you. If you mess up that assist rate, the guy from Red Dead Redemption, he's coming in. He's just gonna or GTA is a better example. They're robbing your car. They're tossing you in the ocean. All right, man. Is there anything specific with ETR you want to promote? Is there a discount after the All-Star break or anything like that for the NBA package?
I'm sure we'll drop the season-long price around the All-Star break, but we had a sale around the holidays that is no longer applicable. So in terms of ETR, we've got NBA DFS product, which has all of our DFS projections, live shows. We brought on Squirrel Patrol onto the DFS show side of things. Super successful NBA DFS player, all-around DFS player. I'm so excited to have him kind of on the content side with myself and Mike Gallagher also mixing in on the shows now going forward. And then on the prop side, we split into two packages. So we've got a full stat projection detail only package where if you weren't interested in trying to get the bets because it's getting increasingly difficult to get bets, we created a separate package where you can just get the full stat projections that we release at 5:00 Eastern every day. And then we have that package along with another package that gives official bets and unofficial bets from the team, along with the full stat projections as well. So two different props packages. That market continues to be ever changing and dynamic and challenging to beat. We've done really well with it. But as always, we keep the picks part of the package weekly to make sure that if it doesn't work for you, you're not tied up long-term, because it can be a challenging market.
What subscription can someone buy to @ you in Discord? What level what level do they need to have?
Literally any of them. Literally any of them. You've got access to @ me in Discord.
That is a small price to pay, guys. Small price to pay to be able to @ Drew Dinkmeyer about Emmanuel Quickly's assist rate. All right, everyone, we're gonna get out of here. If you like this, please subscribe on YouTube. If you're listening to this on the audio feed, you can come over and see our beautiful smiling faces on YouTube. And I will be back next week. Later.